what is spirituality? I feel like after contemplating this, meditating on it, I've come up with that, well, for starters, it's not particularly an action, because there is no one single action that anybody performs as a spiritual centered person. It is not necessarily a belief system, because there are many belief systems that people hold within spirituality. What all spiritual teachings have in common is a mindset. And what I've come to realize is that even an atheist can have a spiritual mindset, whether you believe in a God, source, spirit, cosmic consciousness, or just the idea of science. The most common thing that all spiritual teachings share, is a particular mindset. And that is that we all have these stories we tell ourselves, and that is what our lives are made up of. And so today I want to share with you guys, based on this, my top 3 stories that all of the spiritual masters tell themselves that get them to those spiritual levels of consciousness and out of the ordinary levels of consciousness. First of all, welcome back to another video. I'm Ann Blackwood, your Silicon Valley Sage Sister, here to bring consciousness to the forefront of your daily life to make life a little kinder and simpler. So, as I like to talk about, Wayne Dyer is one of my favorite spiritual teachers. And one of the things that I've been listening to him talk about a lot recently is being of service, is seeing ourselves and others, and seeing God, source, spirit, cosmic consciousness, higher self in ourself. And when you take these 3 stories and put them together, you get the first stories we want to start, the first thoughts, the first ideas we want to contemplate, meditate on when it comes to developing a spiritual mindset to elevate ourselves to the spiritual levels of consciousness. Because that's what spirituality really is about at the end of the day, is living at spiritual levels of consciousness rather than the ordinary levels of consciousness that burden us with so many of the things the ego likes to play with when it comes to especially the meanings that we give things. Because the meanings we understand from a spiritual level of consciousness, the only meaning anything has is the meaning we give it. And when we start to understand that we do this with the ego, we can start to recognize the things that the ego has taught us that keeps us in these ordinary levels of consciousness, or that our egos have been taught that keep us in the ordinary levels of consciousness. So let's get to the first one. Being of service. When it comes to all of the ascended masters, all of the spiritual masters, all of the spiritual teachers, being of service is one of the things that really gets us into the mindset of the law of abundance, which the law of abundance is understanding that when we can give without the expectation of receiving in return, when we can have the mindset of being of service, not being concerned with what we're going to get in return, what this does for us, but just what we can do, this gets us in the flow with the law of abundance, the universal law of abundance. And so we start living from this cycle. And that's what the law of abundance is a cycle of giving and receiving, giving and receiving. And so that is why the spiritual masters end up living from this place where they don't have to be concerned with where the next money, where the next food, where the next anything is going to come from, because they make sure that their needs are taken care of first. But when our needs are actually taken care of, then it gets down to our wants, and we can allow ourselves to release our attachments to the physical things that we hold on to from a lack mindset, we're free to give them away because we know that our needs are met first, and then we are free to give. And then that allows things to just abundantly come back to us because we are focused from this mindset of being of service, giving without the expectation of receiving in return, knowing, as much as this can seem like a contradiction, knowing that that is how we make sure that our needs are met easily and effortlessly. The next story is that we see ourselves in others, that we are actually one and not separate. Because when we can start to see ourselves in others, we can start to relate to others, and we no longer feel so separate. When we start to understand that we are all doing the same things, and that we are all coming from the same places, and that we all have things in common, when we're not focused on what makes us different, but what makes us the same, what we all have in common, life just gets a whole lot easier. We can start living from this place of unshakable peace because we come to everything from a place of understanding rather than judgment. For instance, say someone cuts you off anywhere. Say you see somebody who would otherwise normally upset you, but looking at what they did and recognizing when you've done that before, the places in your mind you might have been when you did that before, you can start to see that we are all going through the same things, and then can therefore relate to each other. And when we can relate to each other, life is a lot easier because we're no longer frustrated, because we understand where someone is coming from. And we can do this with literally anybody. Like even the people we consider the worst of the worst. And this leads me to the last story, which is that God, source, spirit, cosmic consciousness, higher self is in me. Because once we've gotten to the point where we can, from an ego level even, recognize that we are all the same, recognizing ourselves in others, coming to a place of understanding when it comes to interacting with others, we can get to this point where we see God in ourselves and then see God in others, because we're already functioning from this place of automatically seeing ourselves in others. So as we see God in ourselves, we see God in others. And when we can do this, when we can recognize that we are not just connected, we are the all great and powerful, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, as I like to used to call it, God, source, spirit, cosmic consciousness, higher self, the energy that connects us all. When we see that we are that, not just connected to it, then we can see that not just in ourselves, but in others. And we start functioning from this spiritual level of consciousness, being of service, being curious and understanding, being connected and present with the energies of the universe, understanding that we are all the universe looking back at ourselves. When we contemplate these things on a regular basis and start to apply them to our lives, we start to build that spiritual level of consciousness that we are working towards when it comes to living a spiritual life. So these are the things that I want you to start focusing on, because these are the things I had someone, I assume sarcastically, ask me what makes me an expert the other day. And I was thinking about this. And really, I don't consider myself an expert. I consider myself a library of the experts. And these things are what all of the experts share. Being of service, being, of course, taking care of your needs first, and then being of service. seeing yourself and others, recognizing and understanding that we all share things in common, and starting to see ourselves connected in the same rather than apart. And then being able to see not just our connection to, but the God, source, spirit, cosmic consciousness that is inside of us. And then therefore seeing that outside of us, and seeing how all things come together to make up the beauty of the universe. These concepts, these stories, when we can start to tell ourselves these stories, we start to raise our vibration and get ourselves to the spiritual levels of consciousness that all of the teachers, ascended masters, experts before us achieved. Thank you guys for joining me for another video. I have another exciting video coming up after this that I can't wait to share with you as well, where, well, I'm not going to spoil the surprise, but I'm very excited about it. So stay tuned. Check out the links in the description, because I know if you're enjoying my videos here, you'll enjoy the links in the description. That includes dōTERRA, which is your one-stop shop for all your natural living needs. They have the best, purest plant-based products and essential oils. What else? Patreon, where I keep a sort of physical library on the internet of all my favorite teachings, the ones that I have adapted, as well as teachings straight from my teachers. I have the link to my one-on-one if you're ready to step into the spiritual levels of consciousness and out of the ordinary levels of consciousness. I would love to help you with that. Other links in the description as well. And as always, may the energies you serve you well, and let's keep making our way through.